entire thing. So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce you to Dan Pucci and Craig Cavallo, cider experts and author of American Cider, which is being touted as a must-have guide to the booming hard cider industry. Dan Pucci is one of the nation's leading cider experts. He was the founding beverage director at Wassail, New York City's first cider bar and restaurant, and has since traveled the country in a continued pursuit of cider education, awareness, and research. Craig Cavallo is the owner and operator of the Golden Russet Café and Grocery, alongside with his wife, Jenny, in the Hudson Valley of New York. And prior to that, he worked in New York City for 13 years in restaurants, food blogging, and writing for Savoy. When he's not working, he can be found picking fence line apples and dabbling in his own cellar cider experiments. Now, before we cede the floor to Dan and Craig to talk about their incredible book, I'd like to take a moment to recognize tonight's cider event partner, our fellow downtown Westerly local business, the Tapped Apple. And John, if you could come back up on screen, I'd love to introduce you to our audience this evening and have you tell them a little bit about your business. All right, and we'll just wait a second to have John come back up on screen for me here. And we will, there you are. Hi, John.
Hi, thanks for inviting us.
No, thank you so much. We love to partner with other businesses in downtown Westerly. And with that, I will let you tell us a little bit about the Tapped Apple. And Craig and Dan, feel free to come back up on screen whenever you'd like, so you guys can all sort of talk a little bit together before we let you and Dan talk amongst yourselves.
Well, my name is John Wiedenheft. I and my family owns the Tapped Apple Cidery and Winery. I'm John the third. My son is John the fourth. My grandson is John the fifth. So it's a 3-generation project here. My grandson is going to be 22 shortly. He's learning how to make hard ciders and apple wines as well. We're located right here in downtown Westerly, Rhode Island. We do all of our fermenting right here in the tasting room, as you can see. We actually have 600 gallons of hard ciders fermenting right now in those 2 tanks, and which is our last batch of the season. It's obviously for us, since we make our hard cider from fresh produce, fresh fruit, I mean, it is seasonal, unlike many of the large cider makers who make it from concentrates. We don't use concentrates at all for our hard ciders. We've been open almost 4 years. This summer it'll be 4 years, and we just recently purchased a canner, and we are now canning, and we're now in, as you can see here, some of our products. We're in about 15 package stores in Rhode Island at this point. So
that's amazing, John. And could you just tell everyone your hours when the tasting room is open? And for those of you who purchased a tasting for the event through Eventbrite tonight, your books and tasting certificates are ready for pickup at Savoy Bookshop and Café, and we'll be sending you an email about that tomorrow. And John, could you just tell us your hours?
Sure. We're open on Fridays from 4 to 8, and Saturdays from 2 to 8, and Sundays from 2 to 6.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And we have safe COVID safe spacing and all that stuff too. So
fabulous. That's amazing. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat for everyone to check out the Tapped Apple. And so you can click on that and check that out. Dan, Craig, before we let John join the audience, do you guys have any questions or anything for him before we let him go?
Yeah, I would say what do you got in the tanks right now fermenting?
It'll be hard cider, and it's our later season blend. It's a blend of various. I would say it's in the modern style. And with our secret weapon, which is some crabapple cider as well. So
cool. That sounds awesome.
It is. It's pretty tasty. We're doing very well with it.
It's super awesome. I would say what you earlier talking about, you're kind of finding your way into cider through the wine industry, and I was kind of talking a little more about like how you ended up making cider a much larger part of your life.
Well, yes, when we first opened this place, we were Tapped Apple Winery, and cidery, the cider didn't come until later, actually, through popular demand, really. And it's turned out that we're now making and selling more cider than we are wine, which was, a little bit of a surprise to us. But cider is big, and our style is a little bit drier than some of the other stuff you buy commercially, and it's a big hit.
That's awesome. And sorry, Craig.
Just curious, who's buying? Are you selling direct to consumer, kind of there from the tasting room, or do you have any local restaurant accounts or
15 package stores?
Yeah. We have a couple of restaurants, but restaurants are slow right now because of the pandemic.
Sure.
But mostly it's package stores, and our tasting room is going gangbusters, right? Actually, and I think a lot of that is because the URI is nearby, and we seem to get a lot of college kids nowadays, and yeah, it's going well. We have flights of 6 tastes and mix and match with the apple wines and the hard ciders, and enjoying it very much.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome to have a nice. What are some of the feedback that you're giving customers? Like, what are they looking for when they walk in the door? I guess what are kind of the like expectations for cider when they get there?
It's very interesting. We get people who travel hours to come to our cidery because they found out about us online. We get people coming from Long Island, from the Hudson Valley, from New Jersey, from Massachusetts. I don't really, but the hard part is getting the locals to be aware of us. We still have people walking down the sidewalk who say, like, I live right here in Westerly, and I walk up and down the street all the time, and I still don't know you were here. That's still not unusual 4 years into this. So
you're an undiscovered treasure. It happens to us all the time at the bookstore too. People walk in and they say, "Oh my goodness, this beautiful bookstore is here."
Right. People who are Googling for us will drive all kinds of distance to come here, but the locals, it's sort of seeping into the local consciousness. That's the key thing.
Yeah, becoming part of the community.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Really looking forward to reading your book.
Yeah, thanks. Well, and I was trying to do a setup for our little chat here. So about like kind of the idea of this book, and I was going to ask you one more question on the spiel, because a big part of this book is that cider has seen tremendous growth in the last few years. We've seen something today. There's about 1,000 cideries in the United States, up from about 150 just a decade ago, and it's like a 7 times increase, and it's something like less than like a few handful in 20 years ago. It's crazy amount of growth we've seen, but these cideries are not coming out of nowhere, because the raw materials that we have for cider are not coming out of nowhere. These are orchards and apples and traditions that date back 400 years of European colonization of North America. So these ciders, no matter what they are coming from a context, and we kind of saw the cider world kind of trying to spin these narratives and trying to find context themselves. And we want this book to be a really good context for what's happening within the cider community, and where cider is coming from, and where cider is going in the next few years, because of this this tremendous growth. And we understand that this growth is not just happening it's happening, but it's happening upon a foundation of so many things and so many elements of it. So it's really interesting to hear that about people coming from all around, and this kind of amazing resources that are happening in every state now. Like there's cidery now in every state. Mississippi was the last, I think, to actually get one. But now there's a cidery in every single state. It's like 1,000. So it's crazy, and it's great to hear they're kind of happening in every part. And a big part of that has to do about future success is getting a part of the community and ingraining yourself and becoming part of the cultural and community landscape, which has been really interesting to see it happen. And see it transpire, and people really come back for it. And like, so like, what are your, I guess my last question would be like, what are some of your people who keep coming back? Why are they keep coming back? Why are they interested in what you're making?
I was doing a delivery at a package store yesterday, and the package store owner was asking me how business was, and I said, it's great. And he said, well, it's easy to understand. Your product sells itself. All you have to, if somebody will taste it, they want some more. And it's very true. We have a very good tasting product. It's people tend to think sweet with ciders, and so they're very pleasantly surprised when they try ours, which tend to be on the drier side, and they keep coming back.
Has that changed for you in the last few years?
No, we never
No,
really...
not your style, but the consumer expectations.
Well, as they've gotten to know us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find, at least nationally, at least, we see people like, I think 5 years ago, a lot of the talk was like, oh, is it dry? And now I feel like that's in the conversation, but it's not necessarily it's less black and white than it was before.
Right. Yes.
John, how much of your production ethos is inspired by winemaking versus what was the learning curve like to kind of shift your production to mostly cider?
Well, making apple wine and making apple hard cider is extremely similar for us. So it was a very easy transition, actually. Having said that, I introduced my son, John IV, to this. Well, we started making apple wines together about 15 years ago, and since in the last, well, we've been open almost 4 years, and now he is the wine and cider maker. I do more of the regulatory and licensing things, and I'm doing distribution. I'm going out to the package stores. So my son John IV and my grandson John V they're the ones making the hard ciders and wines these days. So my recollection of the transition when I was involved with it was very easy.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's another thing we're going to talk about in the book is that there's a lot of this overlap between Craig and I definitely come at cider from a wine perspective. We both worked in wine for a number of years before we got involved in the cider community, and it's really, I think, an important thing to look at this kind of stuff from, because there is a lot of overlap and a lot of commonality. There's definitely more commonality than differences. Not that there's not differences, but there are a lot of commonalities to it. I
just want to mention one of my son's new projects, new experiments is, and he's always coming up with new recipes, but his latest one is hickory bark hard cider. And it's amazing. You know, I've never heard of it before, but we're going to have some on tap. We're probably not going to go into package store production, but we're going to have some on tap. So it's very exciting.
That sounds delicious. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
That's a really cool idea. I think they have a lot of cool earthy flavors to it. That'd be kind of pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. You can actually make a syrup, like maple syrup. You can make syrups from several different tree.
Is that the process for it?
Yeah, there's a process. Yeah.
You boil it in something. I've heard of it before, but I've never produced it myself.
Well, we're not making syrup out of the hickory bark, but
that's a lot of work. That's a whole other equipment.
We're using it to flavor the hard cider.
Yeah, that's a whole other set of equipment.
Yes.
Well, cool. That's my question for now. For right now, I think May has more. I want to bring you up later on at the end, though. We can talk a little more about. I'm sure we'll have some Q&A we can talk about with some of the ciders and some of the people as we get into more of the nitty gritty of some cider thoughts.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and
Thanks, John. This
for
has been
having
great.
me.
Thanks for having
Yeah.
us. This has been really great.
Thanks very much,
Awesome.
John.
Thank you. Good luck with your book.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
a
It's
lot.
been a lot of fun. So I want to talk a little bit about this book process in this book. So like I said earlier, this book is all about context and creating important narratives for the cider community. Hold on one second, Craig. Can you talk to that? I gotta move this child out of the way.
Sure. We were looking to sort of, like Dan was saying, cider hasn't come from nowhere. That, you know, very what a cameo. That's Sylvia, everybody. She's the lovely 1.5-year-old, the next generation.
Let's go to bed.
I think you made everybody's night. So the book, yeah, we wanted to kind of provide a foundation for why, you know, come to contextualize the rise in cider making and consumption in the country, and mostly kind of provide a bit of information as to where it came from. It's like, you know, to steal Dan's words, cider didn't come from a boardroom. It wasn't just the sort of product that was thrown at the market. There's, you know, 400 years of history of growing apples and making cider in this country, and that history is very deeply tied to human development and just kind of the foundation of the country. And so that's kind of the goal of the book, was to look at the past to kind of understand the present and the future of cider.
Yeah, it's so in the book we kind of we lay out the country through 8 regions. We intro cider, talk about how cider works and how to taste it and drink it, age it, kind of your 101, like what the hell is this stuff. And then we kind of dig into it as into a regional approach, and within each section we kind of like contextualize the history that kind of looks at like a certain period of time and certain issues that are happening in that region during that time period. It's definitely not a comprehensive history, just like the book itself is just like the book itself is not a comprehensive list of all the 1,000 cideries in the United States. That'd be crazy and not really fun to read. So this is kind of looks at the history of the United States, through Craig's words, history of the United States through apples, and kind of understands the certain moments in time. And then we use that historical foundation to overlay a narrative about interesting things that are happening within the cider community today, and issues that are facing cider makers, orchards, and the world itself in today's society through apples and through cider. And cider becomes a lens kind of like understand these things. So like, for example, since we're talking about the Rhode Island and the Northeast in New England, our chapters about New England, all about kind of like the post-revolutionary history of New England and the development of market towns and fledgling industrialization within New England, and kind of how that has direct impact upon cider today. Like, there's a pretty intense through line there between things that are happening in Vermont in the 1830s and things that are happening in Vermont today. It's pretty interesting to kind of find those through lines and what kind of impact they're having. It's pretty fascinating.
And one thing too, just that more background on the book and how it came to be, is Dan and I, Dan, through work he had done at Westerly, a restaurant on Orchard Street in New York City that has since closed, but they were serving almost exclusively the cider program that was just very revolutionary for its time. And Dan got sort of tapped into the national market of cider makers and international. But so ultimately those are kind of the seeds for how the book came to be. But I was thinking about it today, in that we didn't write this book because we had all the information in the book in our brains. The book is the result of just a lot of research and kind of the very passionate community that we found and the information that we had access to. And it's sort of, in some ways with our research, the book kind of started writing itself. And, you know, to Dan's point about how we, you know, framed the New England section around markets. Every region in the book we found kind of an underlying, a through narrative of each, in New York is its own region, and we talk about transportation, sort of how these ideas from the Atlantic coast and the first settlements were funneled through New York and kind of went west into the frontier, but into the Midwest, we talk about education. And so there's sort of each region has its own underlying theme. But just kind of a bit more background on kind of the ideas as the book was coming together, as we were finding all this information. It's a learning experience, to say the least, and hope that folks that read the book can enjoy the exploration, the journey, as much as Dan and I did putting it together.
Yeah, I'm sorry, running something in the chat about your story, Craig. So yeah, it's all about this interesting narrative we found it, and I think we found all this more information through talking to we talked to hundreds of cider makers across the country, recorded hundreds of audio and all this stuff to kind of dig deep and to find some really interesting stories and narratives about not only about what's happening today, but also these like amazing historical anecdotes and historical things that are both a really cool reference and a really interesting guide that's something that you could pick up and read through, but also like pick up as a really great reference book to kind of like talk about cideries that are up and coming or interesting across the country. And one of the things we encountered was that so much of the cideries in the country orchards are facing very similar problems, but very localized issues, or sorry, large issues with localized problems. So we encountered problems like water usage and rights in Colorado, and how like that plays a part, and how climate change in California is really screwing things up in a really intense degree, more so than anywhere else in the country. And these kind of localized stories that play a role in the cider, and that one of the things we kind of allude to in the book is this idea of terroir, and that ciders around the country have a unique profile, a unique taste to them, depending on where they come from. And that has to do with not only the varieties that are planted there, the varieties that are being used, whether that be older apples. Like most of the apples around most cider in the United States are made from apples that were planted with other purposes in mind, whether that be seconds from culinary orchards that we find mostly in the Northeast, where like you find like most of the apples come from cider apples that were planted for farmers markets or things like that don't make the grades that made into cider, or large processing orchards in Michigan that were built to make applesauce, but now no one eats applesauce anymore. So now they're converted into cider. And a small amount of cideries are opening up with dedicated cider orchards with cider varieties that are intended and grown for making cider. So we find this localized terroir as well, basically with varieties that are being used, the landscape, the people behind them, but then also the products that exist in the market as well. And like if you're growing up in a lively beer scene, that's gonna bleed through the same way that like the wineries in Sonoma County impact the Gravenstein apples that are grown there, or the old Northern Spy orchards of Finger Lakes. The cider made from old Northern Spy orchards in Finger Lakes are heavily influenced by the winemaking culture there as well. Or the beer making culture in Oregon impacts the pink ladies that are grown in the Hood River. So it's all local, but it's all not.
There's a question of has the applesauce market died off? I think one part of that, or my answer would be that there's sort of
no, it has. It definitely has.
Certainly. Growers have found more value for their crops through cider than they might have been able to get through processing markets.
Apples took a big hit basically in the 1980s. Apple growing is on a commodity scale or industrial scale is a pretty hard business. A lot of orchards are been struggling for a very long time. And cider is a really interesting way for us to create a new and a better system for orchards. We look at places like Michigan. Michigan orchards were largely built or places like Adams County, Pennsylvania, were largely built for commodity orchards that were built to make applesauce and juice and basically apples that were then processed into other products, wherever they happen to be. And basically in the late 80s, northern apples in northern China became very inexpensive and basically dropped the price on apples. And basically worldwide, apple prices, even not like the price you would get for a bushel of apples in 1970, but the price you get today are essentially the same. Even without inflation, like you spend $40 on a bushel of apples in 1970, you spend $40 a bushel today, which is, you know, craziness. Like the prices have gone down so much that it's really hurt a lot of farmers. So cider is a really unique opportunity for farmers and agriculturalists to create a unique high value added product from their apples.
There is uniquely the applesauce industry or carryovers from it have directly influenced cider making kind of on a national level through an apple called Redfield. And it was an apple that was created by the Geneva Experiment Station in the 1930s, I believe it was introduced. It's a red flesh variety, and it was intended to revolutionize the market and create red applesauce. But by the time it was kind of planted at commercial scale and able to be accessed from growers in the market, the applesauce market had sort of trailed off like we've been talking about. But that didn't mean that there weren't acres of Redfield apples that were in the ground. And so there is a cider maker, the late Terry Maloney from West County Cider in Franklin County, Massachusetts. He took a chance and he fermented a bunch of Redfield and found that it translated really well to a fermented product. And so other cider makers across the country have been following suit. This was probably, I don't know, the first vintage, so to speak, of Redfield at West County, but at least 25 years, if not back in the 80s. But it's a wonderful apple. It has acid, it has tannin, it's tart. It kind of translates as it does out of hand, and that it has those characteristics of kind of like tart cranberries and some earthy like beet qualities to it. But just one kind of segue about how sort of applesauce and apples and cider are kind of currently tied.
Yeah, so I think what's really exciting for Rick and I in the next few years is this, we're at the kind of inflection point within the industry. In the last decade, since cider has grown tremendously, we've seen this. We've seen a lot more orchards go in the ground and a lot more things with the intention of making cider. It's going to really change the landscape of cider as well going forward. We're going to see because of the changing raw materials. That's going to be really exciting for us as cider drinkers and cider producers and cider makers and ciders and everything else to really see and transform what's going to happen in the next few years of cider. It's a really exciting thing to be part of because it's going to change and improve. And it's fascinating happening here in the United States because here in the world there are historic cider cultures in places like the UK and Spain and France and Germany, but they are really looking to what's happening here because of all the innovation and the dedication and the new things that are happening here are happening here in the United States and are then being exported back to Europe and as they're figuring out how to change their own marketplaces. So it's been really interesting to watch that journey take place and watch cider expand as well. Like we just sent some books to Japan. They have a really amazing. Their Japanese cider is basically based off of Japanese orchards are basically based off of American orchards, and their orchards are pretty similar to what we have here. And they're also adapting cider as a new thing for similar reasons. And we're seeing new cideries pop up everywhere around the world. We're seeing stuff happening in. I know folks are opening the first cidery in Kazakhstan, which is pretty amazing because Kazakhstan's the birthplace of apples. If Mesopotamia is the center of agriculture and grains and that kind of stuff, well, Central Asia and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are basically the orchard where things like pistachios and plums and peaches are all grow naturally and are all naturally from. So they're opening their first cidery there, which is really pretty amazing as well. So tell me a little about the history of the book. Craig, want to talk a little more about the history component of the book?
Sure, yeah. And kind of just to emphasize, like the evolution of the book is, the first idea was to start in the Southeast because that's where the first European colony was. And so we started there, and kind of the idea early on was to follow European colonization. So first settlement Southeast, the next was in New England. So the book kind of moves west with European settlements. But we didn't want to tell an exhaustive history of like 400 years of history for the Southeast, and then 400 years of history in Minnesota. So we ended up kind of almost telling like a tangential history, if you will. So we start in 1607 in the Southeast, and then that goes up to about 1800 or 1810 or 20. And then New England sort of, there's some overlap. We start, I think, maybe after the Revolutionary War, and that goes into sort of 1840s or so. New York picks up 1820, and so on, yada, yada, across the country. And we end with the Pacific Northwest kind of picking up around the turn of the 20th century. But that was an idea to sort of like make it more engaging and not an exhaustive, like tiring bore, frankly, for readers.
And also, sorry, as a reader too, you can kind of, you're reading along chronologically. So even though you're moving geographically, you're moving along chronologically through the book.
Sure, yeah. But yeah, I think and to that end, we sort of, the first attempt, the Southeast section, I remember it was just, I sent Dan this like 30-page, it was sort of like glorified note taking, basically, that I was just scouring the internet and like bullet points of like, Dan, Benton County in northern Arkansas produced the most apples in 1904. Their state flower is the apple blossom, all these things that didn't really help contextualize the current growth. So Dan, in his endless patience, sort of helped steer my research and future endeavors, and sort of the book became, we got a little bit better and better for each region, and kind of finding a narrative and finding the snippets we wanted to focus on, and then celebrate and tie that into the greater narrative of today, like cider's current boom. But it was really endlessly fascinating for somebody like me who kind of came into this thing blind without a lot of information. It was just it was really remarkable to see how close the apple was. The apple was in everybody's pocket, essentially, proverbially, hypothetically speaking, but also almost literally from the first arrival of Europeans. And native fruit, even in indigenous cultures before Europeans, native crab apples were here, which kind of can segue, and just I'll mention that the domesticated apple that we eat and consume in the grocery store is from like Europe, essentially, and not those apples like Macintosh, those varieties, the eating varieties, aren't native to this country. They were brought here by Europeans. But the history was compelling. It was fun to learn about.
Sorry, but when Europeans get to the United States, they basically create what they find is that a lot of the European fruit, especially, grows exceptionally well here throughout most of the Americas, especially on the eastern seaboard when they're first reporting these things, and they find exceptional quality, and they begin pretty quickly exporting North American fruit to Europe for consumption, and Apple has changed when they get here. So there's an amazing comprehensive volume called Apples in North America. It's called United States and Canada. What's Bessie's book called? North America.
The illustrated guide, maybe, or something.
Illustrated guide to apples of the United States and Canada. It's 7 volumes. It's like the whole book is like probably this big, right?
I think so.
Maybe more than that. It's massive.
Door frame size, yeah.
Door frame, yeah. It's like back in 14,000 recorded varieties that were grown in the United States and Canada since European arrival, which is a lot. And most of them we don't have anymore, or are no longer grown. He just has this comprehensive guide. So that's been an amazing resource for this project, but also like it's definitely a massive reference book. That's a lot to read. Jenny's illustrated apple history to apples in North America. Thanks, Jenny. It's really amazing book, but really, really fascinating to kind of dig through this history of apples growing here in the United States. So it was really interesting to see how it traces out. And we kind of talk a lot about the history and kind of the untold history of the United States through this kind of stuff, and kind of talking about some of the land use issues and racism throughout the United States as well through the history of apples. So we talk a lot about how so first, like when Europeans start moving west, they're not necessarily, so like European farmers aren't necessarily the best at farming. They basically like when as people start moving west, they basically do the same things they did in the past, where basically they grow grains and have dairy cows and don't necessarily do the best. That's not necessarily the best things as they keep moving west. And then they kept on stripping the land and not doing much better. So by the 1870s, 1880s, we started having these land grant universities, that places like University of Minnesota, that is one of the leading fruit breeding places in the world today still, that develops apples like Wealthy and Haralson, and more commonly Honeycrisp, as cold hardy varieties that are well suited and grown to their environments, which is really cool. So anyways, a lot of history of the book, and kind of how that history ties in directly to issues we're facing cider makers today, and things that are useful to cider consumers to help provide context for the beverage you're consuming. Yeah. Anything else you want to add on the history, Craig?
No, I don't think so. I think, and then, yeah, the idea with the history was kind of the jumping point for the modern narrative, just to kind of explore why certain resources that currently exist, and then how today's cider makers are using those resources to kind of to build the current industry.
Oh, a great example for close to home on that is that it's in 1920. I showed it was 1923. When's the Baldwin bust?
Of 33.
33. So 1933 is the Baldwin bust. So basically, the Baldwin belt stretched all the way from basically from Columbia County in Hudson Valley all the way up to Augusta, Maine. It was basically this all huge stretch of Baldwin apples that basically was the lifeblood of New England. It made most of the apples in the country of the region. All were the single variety of Baldwin, and then we had this like freak series of freezing and thawing in like it was like November or so, and basically something like most of the trees died. Like it got too cold, too fast. Trees all died. Something like up in Maine, they had something like 90% of the trees died. So it's really been, so like that is a really interesting thinking about like how orchards exist in Massachusetts today are heavily influenced by the single event that took place, where basically everything died within the single year, and how orchards rebuilt after that upon Macintosh, which is a pretty common variety, and its derivatives off that, and how Macintosh became the dominant variety of New England because of this die-off of Baldwin that took place back then. So that's kind of how we relate this history back to why you see Macintosh cider today. And someone saying besides other ciders talking Macintosh, like Craig said, West County earlier, up in Coleraine, Massachusetts, and also said Artifact, which is in Florence, Massachusetts, also are two heavily Macintosh heavy cideries, which are both really interesting. I'll talk one question back. Someone asked a question about cider aging capacity. Cider can definitely age and improve and get better over time. Not all cider does age and get better over time. A lot of cider is meant to be drunk, consumed in drunk pretty fresh. It doesn't really improve much. But cider is kind of the intersection of sugar, tannin, acid, and alcohol, and kind of that relationship between those things can help produce an age-worthy cider. But if something is light and fresh and very appley and fruity, it'd be great for moderation wise. But yeah, there can be this ciders can definitely age. Craig, do you want to add anything to that? Sorry.
Yeah. No, I think there's sort of it's interesting. The question has come up a bit too, as we've been kind of talking about the book, and it's interesting to see the market, the consumers interested in the topic. Yes, they can age, like Dan said. There is something to be said for as these smaller cideries are getting up and running, getting their sea legs, so to speak. All this takes money, like any new business. And so if you make cider and intend to age it, while it sits and ages, it's not bringing you cash flow to maintain operation and to continue the business. So unless you're producing at a really large scale from a producer standpoint, you're going to be less likely to age cider and release say like this spring you're going to release 2017 or something, just because you might not have the funds or the resources to sit on that product for 4 years. But from a consumer or a drinker's standpoint, for me, and cider's a very big part of the business my wife and I run here. We look forward every spring to finding out what new releases are and what our cider makers that we work with are making and releasing and working with. And so personally, just as a human who can be somewhat impatient, it's hard for me to just sort of like put a bottle aside in the basement. I have to kind of literally hide it on myself to age it. But there's kind of, cider can age, yes. As a consumer, if you're like me and impatient, it can be hard to like sit on it. And if you're producing cider intended to be aged, it's going to take some finessing to figure out the financial and economics and the business side of things. But the science is there. And while I'm not a fermentation scientist, apples are able to be fermented and aged for sure.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to pop back in, guys, because you were talking so much about farming earlier, and we have two questions that are in the Q&A, which I'm not sure you guys can see. So I just wanted
I see the chat, but not.
Yeah, so you guys, there's a couple. Do you want to hit the one in the chat about the particular cider regions? Like we think of wine and Napa and Sonoma, we can hit on that, and then we can talk a little more about farming, which is what people are asking in the Q&A.
Yeah, let's do regions, and then we can talk about farming.
Perfect.
So and then regions, farming, and then prohibition, which is our favorite topic to yell about. So Craig, do you want to do first regions and I'll do farming, and then, or vice versa? How do you want to do this?
Yeah, I could do. Where's the region question, just so I know, so I can answer it without.
So Craig, it says, are there particular cider regions or areas throughout the country, like when we think of Napa or Sonoma with wine?
Yeah. And that's sort of something. That's how we kind of framed the modern narrative in the book, was kind of geographically speaking. And so there are apples acclimate. They're very durable. They're a very rugged species. They can thrive in many places. And so you'll find them in many places, but in certain places, they do better than others. And so that's kind of like valleys, like here in the Hudson Valley or the Shenandoah Valley, kind of where there's like climate moderators, or if the soil happens to be really good, like the Palouse in the Pacific Northwest, which is just like glacial deposits of 200-foot topsoil that kind of produces apples that grow like vines. So there are regions, they're kind of dotted throughout the country. There are many of them, and I guess succinctly, just those that we've concentrate on in the book, I think will be a good guide for somebody looking to understand where apples do well, and kind of by proxy where cider is being made kind of in abundance.
Yeah, can I add to that for 1 second? There's like regions where apples are grown historically. So like in New England, that's going to be up on Lake Champlain on both sides, on the New York side and Vermont side, up in Franklin County, Massachusetts, throughout the Connecticut River Valley, up on coastal Maine. But then, like Craig said, in Adams County, Pennsylvania, the Shenandoah, all these amazing hillside places throughout different parts of Michigan, on the lake shores. There's lots of amazing places where they grow great apples, and where cider cultures are really starting to build and are in their infancy. One of the cooler ones we found, I think, of that I didn't really know much about, was southwestern Colorado, where you have this amazing culture of trees that are 100 years old from the mining booms there, that are still there, and they're just there because this is going to tie into my farming question here. In the area, because you have these runoff from the mountains. The trees have survived, even though they're not really maintained. No one cares about them. And there's like a nonprofit there. This is kind of both my questions here. So there's a nonprofit there called Montezuma County Orchard Restoration Project, which is a really cool organization that takes care of these trees and maps them and organizes them. And there's now 3 cideries in southwestern Colorado that use these varieties that are, these really unique, odd varieties that are really fascinating and really cool. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, MORP. It's a really cool organization. It's trying to find, they're like 6 hours from any metro area. So like they can't really, farmers markets aren't really a thing for them viability wise. There's not a lot else they can really do with the apples. Back in the 70s, people used to drive from Texas and pick them up, but that's not really a thing anymore. So now, like, they see cider as like a viable way to create an orchard, create an economy there to support the orchards and support the trees. So irrigation there is a really important thing there, and irrigation is something that exists in large parts of the West. A lot of orchards rely on irrigation, and it depends on how it's managed. Basically, is NLBL, and it's becoming an issue. So you find stuff like in New Mexico, the orchards in New Mexico near Taos, a lot of them are supported still by 400-year-old sequias that are built by the Spanish, and they're still in use today. They're upgraded a little bit, but they're basically the same systems that were built 400 years ago. And the irrigation, and it's annual irrigation from the mountain tops that are melt. That's how it supported agriculture in the Southwest for thousands of years, and that's not necessarily the same thing that's very, and that and irrigation in Colorado you find off the Colorado River, which is a very issue in years like 2018, I want to say, where there's a really dry year, and we've heard reports of basically like orchards failing and people like bring guns, raid people, wars and things like that. Like it got really pretty scary and pretty rough there for a couple of years during the dry years, and becomes a real issue along these basins, especially. And then looking at California and the San Joaquin Valley, there are also lots of issues there where people are drilling these wells deeper and deeper into the aquifers, and basically causing lots of issues and creating a very unsustainable orchard systems there. There are most people are growing almonds now, not apples, but it's still a major issue and concern. But in the Northeast here, it's less of an issue. A lot of our smaller orchards that are like these high density small orchard trees are irrigated, but it's less of a concern for that kind of stuff here in the Northeast because water really isn't a concern most years for most orchards in terms of having enough replenishable water. And then someone asked about daydreams of cultivating orchards. So I would say, for me, the thing here about how non-gardeners can help support heirloom apples and apple industry is to spend money, buy things. There are really interesting organizations like the Maine. It's called the Maine Heritage Orchards. Is that Bunker's Orchard up there in Unity?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
It's called the Maine Heritage Orchard. They have an adopted tree program, which is really amazing. It's sponsored by Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. I think that's what it's called, MOFUG.
MOFGA, yeah.
MOFGA, that's it, MOFGA. And they have this amazing orchard up in Unity, Maine, where they have the Common Ground Fair every year. And it's just really special. They have hundreds of varieties up there, and it's a nonprofit that kind of preserves these varieties and maintains them through a friend of ours named John Bunker, who's a eminently talented individual who helps maintain that orchard and does really a lot of great work. And then there's programs around the country too. They're doing similar things with that, and helping to create more land access for young farmers and people who are interested in growing perennial crops.
That's awesome. Now, you said you wanted to talk a little bit about Prohibition before we wrapped up tonight. So do you guys want to talk a little bit about that as we sort of round out the evening?
Totally. Yeah, Craig, do you want to bring it up first?
Yeah. It's sort of, there seems to be this general almost acceptance or understanding that Prohibition killed cider. And that is so deeply, and it's very far from the truth. Prohibition affected cider, certainly, but there were so many nuanced things happening culturally throughout the country that sort of maybe helped put the nail in the coffin, so to speak. But Prohibition, by no means, it didn't kill apple diversity at all. It didn't suddenly stop people from making cider. There were just many, many things. And sort of a preface to Prohibition was temperance. The temperance movement sort of touted alcohol as evil. So that sort of started less and less alcohol consumption. But the social dynamics of the country were shifting. There were immigration bringing over new drinking styles, and ultimately the urbanization of the country cider's made in the countryside. You need space for orchards, and the country was just concentrating into these urban centers, mill towns, and just kind of, we're living closer and closer together. There's no room for apple trees, and it kind of went by the wayside. We kind of say in the book that 1840 is kind of when cider really fell out of the majority. And that's a full 90 years, 2 generations before Prohibition. The writing was on the wall. Just a number of things sort of interfered before Prohibition came along. Apple genetics, there was academia, people learning about apples from a scientific perspective. There was grafting. We were planting at larger scale. So there was no sense in kind of these diversified small orchards growing from seedling. There was no sense in growing at that scale. When you were competing with larger orchards, you have transportation and train systems, the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s. Just many things were sort of casting away the smallness and the rural culture of making cider was just sort of, it was being lost in the forest by the 1840s.
Yeah, like cider pre-1840 is based. There are exceptions to that, but we talk about American cider culture prior to that time period. It's mostly being made on small scale, diversified farms. But by that time period, market-oriented cash crop farms take their place. So cider at the time was a product people made because it was cheap, inexpensive. Therefore, it had very little market value. So if you're putting orchards in, you're looking to maximize your value for your inputs, which means you're putting it into growing fruit for fresh consumption. And a lot of times these big orchards that are going in on both coasts or in the Midwest are going either for export to Europe or Asia, or for growing urban centers, like Craig said. So it takes a lot of money or work to bring apples from like the Lakeshore of Michigan to Chicago, or people would ship apples from down the coast of Maine to the ports of England, in New England, which would be either consumed there or shipped to the UK or Germany. And like there wasn't, if you could ship apples for fresh consumption, the price you get for shipping fresh apples to the UK versus making cider of them is uncomparable. So all the money and investment in orchards basically start going into fresh consumption. And American orchardists never invested or cared much into fresh or into cider making, except for a few marginal minor cases that are exceptions to the rule. So, and then that coupled with temperance was really embraced by nativists, mostly Americans of English descent, as a reaction to the influx of immigrants coming from other parts of Europe and other parts of the world who had a drinking culture. And as these immigrants settled into urban cities, beer, even though they had a wine or beer culture, cider is definitely, beer is definitely a lot easier to make in a city environment in the 1840s or 1860s than cider is. So cider never really became part of the urban landscape because it just was impractical and not easy. So it's like Craig said, it was long dead and out of the conversation long before it was federally mandated to be legal.
That's so fascinating.
So we like to dispel some things, because a lot of cideries end up having this like narrative about prohibition. There's always like rumors of like, or hyperbole about like people chopping down orchards, there were cider orchards and all that stuff, and it's definitely not it's not true. There were no orchards to cut down. Like if you're looking to cut down a cider orchard in the 1920s, you'd have had a very hard time finding one because it didn't exist.
You're swinging at ghosts. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing.
No cider orchards harmed in the making of Prohibition, sort of.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they're long dead.
Okay, awesome. That's so interesting. So we're actually getting really close to the hour mark here. I don't know if you guys want to see if John is able to come back up on screen. He may have had to step away. So we'll give him a second to see if he can pop back up on screen with us. But I just wanted to take a second to say thank you. Hi, John. I
Hey.
just want to take a second and I'll let you guys sort of all have the last word, but to just say thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you for bearing with my little technical difficulties there at the beginning. It's been a year since we started doing all of this. And of course, you know, you have to have a 1-year anniversary of some technical difficulties, right? But thank you guys so much for joining us this evening and enlightening us about this beverage. I think we're all going to think a little differently when we have a glass of cider or of apple wine, about how much history there is in that glass and how much goes into it, which is really incredible. And for those of you who are watching, if you haven't already purchased a copy of American Cider, I'm going to drop that link in the chat one more time. And I'm going to go quiet. I'll be with you guys till the end, and I'll let you guys just sort of have a little chat to close it out. Thanks for coming back on screen, John, and thanks for joining us. And everyone go check out the Tapped Apple next time you're in Westerly.
And thank you, Anastasia, for putting this on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
So yeah, I guess rounding back out, I guess, John, do you have any questions for us, or how you're feeling about this?
Not yet. I just started reading your book, but it's a fabulous read. I'm really, what little I've read so far, I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah,
a lot of stuff I didn't know about.
Yeah, we try to dig deep and to make something that's both enlightening, curious, enlightening for like professionals like John here, but also for, you know, everyone else can pick it up and think it and really enjoy it and find value in it and find something exciting in it and make you thirsty for more cider, which is important.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a really fun process to do this thing. It's really fun to see the reaction of people, because it challenges the book challenges expectations, but at the same time, like, yeah, shows the real complex. I think hopefully shows the real complexity of something that's really unique and something really close to my heart.
So I have a question for you. How long did it take you guys to write this book?
A while. We started this book. The first infancy of this first whispers of this book came out in probably the fall of 2017. We started working on it in earnest the fall of 2018. We've rewritten it many times since then. Yeah, a while it took to write this thing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We finished our first draft, I think. Well, my daughter's 18 months now, so we finished it a week before we finished the book. Actually, let's tell that story. So the book was finished a week before she was born, and the same weekend, Craig opened his cafe, his restaurant. He opened the restaurant on Friday. We turned the book in on Monday. Then she was born. I think she was either born on Friday, the next Friday. I think she was born, I want to say. So it was like, yeah, Craig opened one week. It was crazy.
It was life. It's fun. Life was happening while we wrote the book, and then Dan and I we signed the book contract the day after Jenny and I got married in California, where we were. We were poolside. It seemed very luxurious. It seemed like we were writing a contract to write about something other than cider. But yeah, it was fun. We welcomed a baby boy 6 weeks ago, and so it's sort of the book came to us. Thanks very much. The book came to us at a time, Dan and I, both our lives, where we were just, our lives were still being led, and it's forever going to be a special thing to kind of hold the book and just think about our lives playing out kind of in tandem with the writing of it. But yeah, it was a fun journey.
Yeah, we did the book remotely because Craig's 2 hours away from me. So we did it all remotely pre-COVID, which is, I think I was reflecting on earlier before this.
Yeah.
We're old hats at this now.
Amazing. Well, unless you guys have anything else,
I just want to put in my input. So I have started reading the book, and I just want to say, from a novice standpoint, because I hear my husband and my grandson and my stepson talk about malagas and fermentation and this and that. I have no clue what they're talking about. So it was kind of fun and exciting for me to read the book and have it broken down to me so I could understand the process and go, oh, that's why they're always talking about that. So I think this book is good for those who are in the business, those who are not in the business, those who just want to know something about the history of it, or maybe want to make cider themselves. So I think the book is pretty expansive in that it reaches many audiences.
That's really nice.
Thank you.
Thank you for
That's so
saying so.
perfect. Well, for those of you who have already purchased a copy, they are on their way or ready for pickup for you. And again, I dropped links in the chat, or you can visit us at the bookstore to grab your own copy. And with that, I will let you guys enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you all so much for joining. This was amazing. Dan, Craig, what an interesting ride. I can't wait to read the whole book. And
Great,
John,
thank you.
Thank you again. All right. Have a great
Thanks,
night,
John.
everyone.
Thanks, Anastasia.
Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
Bye,
everyone.
Craig. Talk to you later.
Thank
See ya.
you.
So long.